people have said you have a very tough exterior. I'm going to say you're just extremely tough. Like you're extremely tough. But you reveal in this book some of your life's more vulnerable moments. How challenging is it for a tough athlete like you to open up so candidly?
Well, it wasn't that hard because I wrote the book with my sister, Maria Burns Ortiz, who just happens to be a brilliant sports journalist. And she's really easy to talk to. She knows the she asks questions that I had never even thought to ask myself. And it it was actually the process wasn't something really, really difficult. I mean, it's hard putting into words some things,
Hmm.
but I was speaking to someone that went through it with me and that really loves me and I love them back. And so every single word came from the heart as if it was spoken to someone I love. And that's it. It's not as hard that it as talking to someone who's a stranger and feigning sympathy as opposed to someone that's hurting with you.
I mean, but there is that very, one of the most striking moments in the book is when you talk about your father's suicide. And I mean, was there a part of you that was nervous about just about getting that out there into the public?
I mean, it was known. I guess I didn't delve in it too deeply, because the people that I was talking to, the only reason that they would ask me about him was because they would benefit professionally, and I was in a scenario where I would benefit professionally from talking about him, and I felt I was really conflicted about it for a long time to the point where I just stopped talking about him entirely to the media, and I felt like the story did need to be told right and in depth, and the best way to do it is with my sister.
One of those best parts of the book are those discussions about your early days, growing up. And you seem to have, you and I were talking before the interview about our love of wrestling and wrestling
Yeah.
dolls and all that. I want to go back to when you were a kid in California, in North Dakota. When do you first recall feeling like you were a fighter?
Um, like I was a fighter.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I've never felt like a fighter.
Well,
Like
I
I've never.
started out as a swimmer,
Yeah.
and I always thought of myself that I was going to be like a champion, an Olympic champion. But I guess the first time I considered myself a fighter was I was like at daycare or something like that. It wasn't even first grade; it was probably like kindergarten, and some kid was picking on my sister, and I just saw Sister Act, so I went and kicked him in the nuts. And I felt so cool until I got in trouble. And of course, I met with Whoopi Goldberg. I was like, that's the one thing I was dying to tell her. I was like, I don't know if you would feel good or bad about this, but I kicked a little boy in the nuts because of you.
I love that that's the lesson you took from Sister Act at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah. When in doubt, kick him in the nuts.
But your mom, you come from a family of fighters. Your mom, Anne
Yeah.
Maria, the world champion in judo in 1984. She was also your first judo coach. And she was tough. You recall in the book and it's amazing, when you broke your toe, she made you do laps. Not hopping laps, but actually running laps on the broken toe.
Mhm.
What do you remember learning from that experience?
I learned that I could fight through things. And even if my toe hurts, it doesn't control my destiny or anything like that. Because my mom, what she said, other than you have 9 extra toes, was, what are you going to do if you break your toe on the day of the Olympics? It's one day. You have to be the best in the world on that one day. Any amount of things could go wrong on that day. And she was trying to teach me that I could fight through imperfect situations. I could still be the best in the world when the stars aren't aligned.
Back when you were 16 years old, you leave home, you train for the 2004 Olympics. I mean, when most people listen to this were 16 years old, they were eating Fun Dip or they were playing Pokemon, and you were playing Pokemon.
I was.
But they were, they were not doing necessarily intense training. Can you take us through some of that training you were doing when you were 16?
Well, I would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I would go running at negative 20 degrees below zero. And um, I would have to pretty much devote my whole day, every single day, to training. And I would go train in the evenings. And um, I was like a little girl compared to everybody else because there's a big age gap.
Mhm.
Like the closest people to my age are like 30. So I was very lonely. But my only outlet, my only solace was actually competing and fighting. And so it was a strange time. I felt like I was on this grand mission, you know. I was at Miyagi's house, and he was just not really babying me. I was at a time where I felt like I had to endure hardship in order to deserve greatness.
But so many people, when they're 16 years old, you can't get them out of bed. I sound like a parent. I don't have any kids, but like you can't get them out of bed at 8:30 to go to school. And what was it that made you be okay with waking up at 5 in the morning and training so hard and being away from your family?
Because I thought that's what I needed to do.
Right.
Because I wanted to win the Olympics a lot more than I wanted to sleep in.
And you also open up during that time about developing an eating disorder during that time.
Is that a question?
Yeah, it is. But the question would be, when you're 16, that is a very normal thing that 16-year-olds do. That not a very normal thing, but it's not, unfortunately, not uncommon that 16-year-olds would find themselves in that situation.
It's not uncommon, especially we're in a society that has kind of unhealthy and unrealistic beauty standards given to young girls. But on top of that, I was also in a sport that had weight divisions, and I had to be certain weights on deadlines, and those two things combined were very bad for me at that age. And a lot of the people that were training me at the time had no experience training teenage girls and didn't know that there are certain things that you have to handle differently with a young girl going through puberty and being self-conscious about everything. And it's crazy how little kids, their self-esteem drops at that age. You're a young kid and you think, I'm the ultimate warrior, I'm awesome, da da da. And then we get to your formative years, your teenage years, and you just start to doubt everything about yourself. And it was all those factors at the same time that came together.
I mean, the reason I bring it up is because one thread throughout the book that I found was the idea of what is a fight, that the fight is not necessarily just with another person in the ring or not with another person on the mat. The fight is oftentimes with the things that are happening in your life, that the fight can be fighting to wake up at 5 in the morning, fighting to keep on this diet, fighting to lose weight. It's a constant fight. Can you describe to me the fight and how you ended up overcoming this eating disorder?
Well, everyone is in their own battle.
Yeah.
And how I ended up overcoming it was, it's in the book. It's kind of a longer story, but it actually, an ex-boyfriend told me a story that completely shifted my perspective on it. And I used to say, it's not that easy. It's not that easy to change. It's not that easy to fix this. And he just convinced me. He was just like, yes, it is that easy. It's as easy as you decide it is. And that was it. It was just one decision away, and I never knew it that whole time.
And you talk about the idea of normalcy, waking up at 5 in the morning. Again, not something that the average 16-year-olds were doing. But one of my favorite parts of the book is when you decide to take some time off to party. You admit to yourself that maybe the life up to this point had been a bit too intense and you wanted to experience a little bit of normalcy. What led you to that decision? I mean, had the discipline become too much?
No, I was just I kind of slowly lost my love of the sport. I love
of judo.
I love the art, but the sport was taking away from my enjoyment, and so I was so unhappy, and I maybe I couldn't really figure it out. I thought maybe it's because I did miss out on all these things. Maybe that's why it seems like whenever I watch TV or whenever I see a music video and every single time I hear a song about popping bottles in the club, everyone sounds so happy and I'm not. So I'm like, maybe that's what I'm missing.
Yeah.
Because I never went to a single dance party, had a date in high school.
Yeah.
So I'm like, maybe I'm missing out. Maybe that's what it is. And I went to go see if that's what it was, and it wasn't. And that whole year was important because that's how I really discovered my path was leading me to MMA. And it wasn't being a bartender and getting drunk every day so I wouldn't think about how unhappy I was.
And that's it. I mean, I on a very, very diminished level, I know what you mean. Like I feel like I started working when I was just like kind of out of high school, and then went to university, and then like I never had that time to go travel in Tahiti and backpack and all that stuff. And I'm interested to hear that so you say you didn't find it all that exhilarating when you actually took the time to do quote unquote normal early 20s things.
Yeah. It was very much glorified
Yeah.
by the people trying to sell you alcohol and music videos. It turns out it was all just one big commercial, and I bought into it. And but I needed to go through it to learn these lessons myself. Some things you can be told and learn, and some things you have to experience to learn.
And this was all coming out of, being one of the best in the world at judo. And you say at this point, after judo, you felt like you were doing nothing with your life. I'm interested to hear how you set your sights on mixed martial arts. Like, how did you feel when you saw that MMA fight for the first time?
I think the first MMA fight I ever saw was my friend Manny Gambarian had a fight, and he was doing judo and showed me like on a VHS tape of him knocking some guy out in a few seconds. I was like, okay, cool, whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was anything. I was like, that's cool, good for you.
Yeah.
Glad you won. And then some other guys at that gym highest end would, Carl Parisian was from there. And I remember him wearing these little short shorts that said The Heat on it, and like shadow boxing at a camera. And I remember like laughing at him in my head thinking, I'm like, you look so ridiculous. And I was like embarrassed for him. I'm like, oh my God, Caro, you're in your little short. And then, lo and behold, I ended up in a little short shadow boxing at cameras too. And that's how I first got exposed to it. And then Manny ended up on season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter. And I watched the first episode, but I was so mad that the other people on the show were saying mean things about Manny that I didn't watch it again until he was actually in the finale. So I was watching the show itself, and I was so pissed off at how they portrayed Manny and how they were treating him that I didn't watch any of the reality TV show stuff. I just waited until the actual finale to watch the fight itself. And I was jumping up on the couch, running back and forth the length of the couch. I mean, I was losing my mind, screaming, alone in a room, and there was nobody there. Like, people were walking through, to the kitchen and stuff, but I was freaking out. And that never happened to me watching judo, watching the Super Bowl, watching the World Series, like the Olympics, none of these things. And but I never knew that women's MMA existed. I always thought like that would be cool if I could do that, but I just thought it wasn't there. Just like, there's no football, for women. So I just didn't even think about it until I saw Gina Carano fight Julie Kedzie. And I saw how my teammates received them with more respect and admiration than I'd ever seen them give me. And then that just planted the seed in my mind that I wanted to be like them. And I just tried to not think about it because I still had Olympics coming up. And then after the Olympics, and I was just bartending and watching MMA on TV while making martinis and pouring beers and telling the patrons that, oh yeah, I could totally beat all those chicks, everybody that does that. And everyone, of course, just nodded and was like, yeah, whatever, girl. Like, it was really frustrating to know that I was the best in the world at something and no one believed me.
And then you ended up doing it. I mean, no one believed that the UFC would ever admit women, including the president, including Dana White. One of the themes throughout the book, again, that's so inspiring is that how did you know and how did you keep the faith that one day they would allow women in the UFC?
Because I felt like they were entitled to their opinion because they hadn't met me yet. I felt like that there was nobody else in the world more qualified to change all of that but like me. I knew that I was the one, and I didn't need anyone to tell me that. And it was a big change from judo when I had all these people pressuring me and like, you are the one, you have to win the medal, you have to win the medal, you're the best on the team, you're the one that brings the most medals, you have to bring them back home the medal, because if we go home empty-handed, it's your fault. And it was different in MMA because I felt like everyone was rooting for me to fail and thinking I was being ridiculous. And I had this new surge of motivation that I never had in judo with trying to fulfill everyone's expectations. I really wanted to prove everybody wrong, and that was what that thought that I couldn't get out of my mind all day long. I mean, I would be in the shower. I would shadow box in the shower. I would take the stair. I would just, every single thing that I did all day long was in the thought. I was like, how am I going to prove everyone wrong? And that was always so much more motivating than how am I going to keep from letting everyone down.
And was proving people wrong more important than your own personal success, or was that part of it?
It was both.
Yeah.
But I realize I'm much more motivated by spite than anything else. If I was a Jedi, I'd definitely be dark side. I'd be Darth Rowdy for sure. Big time. Anger, fear, aggression.
I'm sure there are people who are calling you Darth Rowdy behind your back. I'm sure people that are,
They should say it to my face. I'd love that.
Because you're undefeated. I mean, you destroy your opponents in just 14 seconds, 16 seconds. It's really remarkable. Outside of the actual physical training, though maybe that's part of it, what is the key to that success?
Well,
I know it's a big question.
Yeah, well, the whole book, every chapter, I think lists one of the keys. Everything is, it's a lesson. It's chronological lessons that I learned from fighting. There's not one thing. And the funny thing is, all of those lessons apply to all the fights outside of it. It's not just to MMA or boxing or anything like that. I mean, every single concept from a real fight you can apply to just trying to keep the lights on in your house.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm trying to ask. Like, what are those lessons that you can take from reading this book, even if you're not a fighter, even if you're not even necessarily an athlete, that you want people to take from when they read this book?
I mean, there's a lot of them, but I think one of the main ones was that all of the worst things that happened in my life resulted in all of the best things that ever happened. And every missed opportunity, I ended up being grateful that I missed it. And I think that's the main thing, just keeping the faith that it's all going to end up all right.
But isn't there, like, you talk about how losing is not even a possibility. Winning is easily the most important thing. But is there even such a thing as losing? Because wouldn't every loss then lead to a victory?
I mean, I lucked out in that I had a career before this, and so I learned all the lessons I needed to learn from losses long ago. I've already lost at the worst times possible. My mother was a world judo champion, and I always wanted to be one just like her. And I lost in the finals of the World Judo Championships. I grew up my whole life thinking I would win the Olympics, and I went and I failed twice. And nothing could ever hurt me so much except for losing a loved one. And I learned from that. And a lot of people say, well, you can't win forever. You have to lose at some point. I'm like, yeah, I already got that shit out of I already got that stuff out of the way.
It's okay. We'll give her a good bleep. Don't
Give
worry
me a good
about
bleep.
it. Yeah, we'll
I got that stuff out of the way. Yeah, and the lessons have been learned. And my mom says all the time, it's much better to learn from a win than a loss. So I spend a lot of time going over my own videos more than the girls I fight. And I try to break myself down on what could I possibly do better.
Not only are you a pioneer in MMA and in UFC and in combat sports, but Sports Illustrated just recently named you the most dominant athlete of our time. Not even the most dominant MMA fighter of our time or UFC fighter of our time. How did that feel when you had that kind of validation on the cover of Sports Illustrated?
You know what felt the best?
What's that?
That the word woman wasn't in it.
Why is that?
Because it's not needed. And more and more often it's getting left out. The men, when they walk into the octagon, they're not introduced as being the men's heavyweight or the men's bantamweight. And now finally we've reached a point where they don't say women's bantamweight anymore. And the change is happening in baby steps. And first it started in MMA, and now it's moved to the cover of Sports Illustrated.
You do say, though, in the book that part of the appeal of women's MMA is, and you had that great theme song of sex and violence. And you said, why would they? And they declined your theme song because, and you said, there's only two words in the song, sex and violence. And you said, those are the only two things that women's MMA is about sex appeal and about violence.
I thought that, at the time, I considered MMA to be aimed at a much older audience, and they got fights and chicks in bikinis.
Yeah. And do you still feel that way?
Now, I'm I'm starting to see it in a little bit of a different way because I thought that was the only way possible that I could really generate attention for the women's side of the sport was to use everything that I could
Yeah.
to use the fighting, to use the sex appeal, to use the trash talk, to use everything. Not just like how swimmers shave their arm hair so they can go just that little bit faster. And I was trying to do everything that I could. And then as more and more momentum started to pick up and this became bigger than I ever thought it was going to be, I realized that this sport and this journey touches on way more people than just a late night audience.
And did that change your then behavior in the ring? Did it change your behavior outside of the ring?
I think it changed my perspective of what I was doing.
But yet still, I mean, you pose on the cover of ESPN and the Sports Illustrated very unsexualized cover. But the first cover, the nude cover. And there are those online who would regard you as a sex symbol in MMA. Are you comfortable with being labeled as a sex symbol?
Yeah. I mean, I think 16-year-old me would have been stoked. I would have been pretty excited about it. But I mean, I can't live as if an 8-year-old is following me around all the time. If I am in a mature setting and on a mature program, then I'm going to. It's aimed for adults, and I know there's no kids listening or around, then I'm going to speak as if I'm speaking to adults.
Yeah.
If I'm in a setting where I'm around kids, then I'm going to speak as if I would to kids. And unfortunately, we're reached a point where everyone is so exposed all the time and everything on the internet is forever and every person is documenting their life constantly. And we're put under pressure to make everything bubble wrapped and baby proof.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, it's not my fault that your kid is watching Showtime at 12 a.m. I'm going to speak as if the people that should be up watching Showtime at 12 a.m. are listening.
Yeah.
And if I'm on in the morning, I'll speak in a different way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to appeal to different audiences.
But is it a persona at all? One thing that you see in this book is, some people would find it off-putting. I kind of really loved it. Was some would say like your very healthy ego, and you acknowledge in the book that people call you arrogant or call you cocky. I mean, is this part of a persona, or is that the real Ronda Rousey?
I thought so little of myself for so long,
Yeah.
and I worked so hard to think that I was worth something.
Yeah.
That I don't understand why people are so offended that I have the confidence that I worked for years toward. And I think that a lot of people confuse humility with self-depreciation. Why do I have to think less of myself to be a better person? I think that complimenting yourself is the funnest form of manifestation. If I look myself in the mirror and I go, "You look good, gorgeous,"
Yeah.
I feel more pretty the rest of the day. Does it make me a better person if I look myself in the mirror and I shrug and walk away and I'm just a little bit less jazzed that morning? I mean, I think that I like to show my humility in different ways than most people do. And a lot of people call that arrogance, but I just call that being myself.
You've already achieved so much at such a young age. What are your goals from here on in?
Well, a lot of people are always thinking like, what opponent, what one single person is going to be your greatest challenge? And I'm trying to not convince, but help people understand that the big picture, the legacy is the goal. I want to be able to be the one that dominated and walked away undefeated and unscathed. And too many legends of sport have stuck around a little bit too long. And I want to be that one, the one that came in, shined bright in my time, and then moved on to the next thing before I was a little bit too old and a little bit too slow and it was a little bit too late.
Do you ever think about your future after fighting?
All the time, after dealing with how lost I was post Olympics and judo and I had no goals. I'm lining up so many goals and other things to go towards afterward because there's no better feeling in the world than defending my belt. And it's a fix I get to go back to every couple of months, but it's not going to be there anymore after a while. And so I have to find something else to move on to. And that's why I spend time and energy taking going and filming between fights when it takes my energy away, and it makes it more difficult to multitask and do those things. But I want to be able to have that option to go to acting afterward. That's why I spend time writing books with my sister. So maybe I could have a future in being an author. That's why I go to do WrestleMania. Maybe I'll have that option later on. And it's just I learned the lesson that being so laser focused that nothing else in the world exists to you is not exactly the right way to go about it, because that's how, when I was going for Olympics, that was it. I was going to live and breathe Olympics every single day, and I was going to win Olympic gold, and I was going to be happily ever after.
Yeah.
And I went and got Olympic bronze and realized that no one cares. They care for 1 month out of every 4 years. And you know what happens in September when the Olympics is over? You realize that you have no job, you have no work experience, and nobody gives a damn that Olympic medal is on your resume. Right. They're not going to hire you. So, I don't know. I forgot what your question even was.
Well, no, it was but I'm interested to hear why. Like, you said that the laser focus is not good for you. Like, what was it? What was the catalyst outside of the Olympics that gave you that realization?
The catalyst outside of the
Olympics?
Olympics?
Like you said. So you said you went to the Olympics, and and it's over in September, and you're not. And you realize that it's all kind of done. But I'm interested to hear that sounds like an interesting epiphany to have for someone who was so single-minded for so long.
When you're in a sport like judo, you're so immersed in it, and there's this little subculture where everybody that you know and spend your day with, that's the most important in their day too.
Yeah.
And I got outside of that little small group of people and returned to the real world. And I told somebody one day that I was an Olympic medalist, and they said, "Oh, that's cool. I collect stamps." And that was a wake-up call for me, because that was, the two were the same to them.
Ronda Rousey, this book is absolutely inspirational, and I mean, even for people who aren't even necessarily into fighting and not necessarily into MMA, it's just an inspirational book all itself. So I want to thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.